We would like to start, so let's welcome Grant Swanable, our guest speaker. This is our webinar number 195, which is a cool number. Okay. I think till now we have seen Grant at least 5 to 10 times. I don't have the count, but I'm sure you have contributed to this a lot. We have been doing those webinars. Yeah, we have been doing those webinars since COVID. And since then, we do a webinar every week, and we always ask people who have expertise, who have knowledge, to come and share with people about some interesting topics. Grant Swanable is a friend for years, and he has been doing a lot of work lately around the globe. He has been supporting people in Europe, in Asia, in Africa, in Middle East, not just in helping them with training. No, it's much more helping them with consulting, corporate membership, benchmarking, and as well doing a lot of transformation projects in supply chain. So Grant comes with lots of experience, and he's comes from demand planning and supply chain background. Has been doing lots of consulting, lots of support, and he's the regional director for Association of Supply Chain Management in our region. He is responsible for Africa, Middle East, and Asia as well, right? Part of Asia, right, Grant?
Europe now as well, yes. Not Asia, but
Europe now as well.
Yes.
Asia and Europe. So he's controlling half of the world. Okay. So I don't think you have China with you, right?
Not China, no.
Yeah, but he has India and he has lots of challenging. So he has been working across different cultures, hosted in different events and webinars and conferences all over the world. So we always learn from him what is new, and he was always helping all of us to learn. So you can imagine each time I meet Grant, I learn something new. So we are lucky to have you today with us, Grant. Okay.
Shireen, thank you so much for that, and thank you for the amazing introduction. I too learn a lot from you and all of your colleagues at Symbios-Consulting. It's always such a pleasure to do many projects with you, and thank you so much for having me back again. I think I definitely have lost count with how many times we've had these kind of conversations, and it's always such a pleasure. So what the topic is for today, and I'll just quickly share my screen with you all. We're going to talk about the topic of return on education. So you might have heard return on investment, right? ROI. It's a very common metric, particularly in the financial field, where we're looking at investments that we make, spend that we're doing as an organization, and really trying to see, did it make sense for us to do that? Or is there a return or a benefit to what we had invested after the fact, and once we've implemented an initiative, purchased something, implemented a system, or whatever we've spent our money on, to be honest. But one of the places that very commonly organizations don't measure the return is on training engagements and education. So we know, as the Association for Supply Chain Management, I mean, this is really a core function of what we do, is we provide organizations through our partner network, mostly through Symbios-Consulting, as you will know on the call today. We provide them with certification, certificate programs, foundational level training, and a few other options for training or learning engagements as well. So we often see this where organizations have a sort of a preconceived view of what they want to do. And in many cases, it's the right view. You know, they say, hey, I want to do a certification training for 7 of my leadership team. Or I want to do a mass foundational training with 32 people who work in the warehouse. So very good goals to have. But we know that if you're going to really take a mass scale training, it comes at a cost. There's always a cost involved. And sometimes organizations are not very good at measuring that cost. So what I want to do, or measuring the cost and the benefit, let me say. So what I want to do today is take you through a methodology and just help your thought process around how would you go about looking at measuring a return on education, right? You might be thinking of doing a engagement with your organization. You might be looking at training of some kind, skills upliftment or development. So let's dive into this and see what the options are around looking at that return on education. So really in today's discussion, we'll be defining ROE, right? ROI, you've heard of, but let's talk a little bit about ROE. Then we want to go into the process of determining training needs. So this is a pre-step. How do we know which types of training we need in an organization? Now, there's actually a few options when it comes to skills development. So think about a skills gap that you have in the organization. And I'm not talking about individuals. I'm talking about a supply chain view. Where are the gaps? What are the gaps? What kind of skills do we not have? Shireen mentioned in her very nice introduction of me that I have a demand planning background. So what if demand planning or forecasting as a skill is not very well developed in your organization? That could be something that's there, right? So there's many options to close that gap. You could close the gap through just hiring somebody from the outside who has that skill already. That's one way to do it. The other way to do it is through experience, to give the individual experience so that they can learn and develop and eventually get that skill through that means. The other way is to send them on a training course or to provide them some sort of training where they can actually learn that skill. So that's typically where this sits. When we look at the spend that companies make to learn that skill or to be trained on that, that's where we're going to see a cost involved. So we'll talk about a bit about the process of determining the training needs for that purpose. The next thing we'll go through is the ROI Institute V model. So that's a framework that the ROI Institute that I've just become certified with, in fact, actually put together. So it fits very nicely into the kind of offerings that we provide as ASCM and as Symbios-Consulting. And then I'll quickly talk about what process could you follow to apply an ROE framework. So how could you start to measure the return on the engagement or the return on the education in your own organization? And then at the end, I just want to talk a little bit about ASCM and then some other supply chain training options that we have. So why does it matter to define or to look at the return on education? Well, it matters from three perspectives. The one is learning and development, upskilling, and then training engagements. So these three could be slightly different in your organization. The first thing is that we want to measure the return on the investment because it demonstrates business value, right? Proving the contribution of organizations to goals such as revenue growth, cost savings, and even efficiency improvements that you get by doing a training engagement by having more effective individuals in the organization. It also helps us to justify an L&D investment, right? L&D initiatives, which budgets sometimes sit with learning and development, with HR, sometimes it sits in the industry, sometimes it sits at the actual level of the supply chain. So it helps us to just demonstrate the business value of the tasks and activities that we're doing. The next thing is to optimize resource allocation. So knowing what a return on investment is going to look like helps us to justify the cost and also allocate resources in the form of people and in the form of monetary resources to those kind of initiatives. So it helps to compare, if you will, the difference between should we implement a new SAP system or should we do some training or should we do a version of both, right? So this is how it's going to help us to understand those different elements. The third component is that it drives continuous improvement. Knowing what the return is of everything we do helps us to determine what the next steps are going to be to do something better. So being able to measure a return on investment helps us to justify that initiative and also the future initiatives that we might want to go ahead and do. The fourth element there is to strengthen stakeholder buy-in. So imagine you as an individual in your organization looking at, for example, one of our certifications. Maybe you're saying, hey, the CSCP looks really good. Maybe we should think about doing that. How could you start and take this to your manager and say, well, let's do the CSCP. Let's send all 5 of our management team onto the CSCP course. But you'd have to justify it from a financial perspective, right? So it isn't a cheap course, I'll tell you that, but it is worth money. But this is something that ROI can help us determine. And then support talent retention and engagement. So there's always this topic that you hear about is, oh, it's expensive to train our people. And what if we invest in them and then they leave the organization and they go use their skills somewhere else? But there's always the corollary of that, which is, what if we don't invest in them? And then we have a bunch of people in our organization that are unskilled and cannot do the jobs effectively. So there's also that viewpoint that we need to consider, right? But thinking about that, supporting retention of talent, a skilled, engaged labor force who knows what they're doing and wants to stay and wants to make an impact. So then let's talk about a little bit more about the definition of ROE, return on education. So return on education refers to a measurable benefit, something that's either tangible or intangible, that the individuals, the organizations, or even society as a whole can gain from in terms of investment in education, in training, and in upskilling them. There's different ways to do this, right? We know that training per se is not just classroom training. There's also on-the-job training, right? There's also other ways to upskill people. Job shadowing, for example, is a good way to do that. But there are different ways to actually engage in that, but most of the time they'll come with some kind of cost. Unlike return on investment, which focuses specifically on financial returns, when we think of return on education, we're actually broadening the view of what we can do to benefit ourselves as an organization. It may not just be that final financial number of, we spent $1 million and we got $3 million worth of revenue or worth of benefit from it. It's not just that. We also take it down a level, and you'll see this when we get to the V model, where we take it down to the level of, let's look at specific metrics, right? Let's look at specific elements in our supply chain, or even the application of the skills that people have into the supply chain itself. So we're looking at other more long-term things like personal development, embedded job performance of our organization and our people, and also be more productive, for the long term within the organization. So one thing that is really true, if I'm honest, is it is difficult to measure the return on an education engagement. And the reason why it's difficult is because there's a disconnect between learning and having more skill and then applying that and seeing the benefit. There's a few steps that have to happen. It's not an instant step, right? And that goes the same for any learning and development, program. An MBA, for example. I'll be honest, I know some people with MBAs that really aren't that smart, right? Or that haven't implemented something before. So that's where we need to make that link, right? And that's why I want to link this to the engagement and the cost of that to the actual benefit at the end. But we'll talk a little bit about how we can do that. So some of the key components of the return on education are, for an individual, from an individual benefit perspective, it helps them with career advancement, increased earning potential as well, having certifications and more skills, of course, and then enhanced skills and knowledge for personal and professional growth. We also have organizational impact, which is probably where you'd be most interested. So improved employee productivity and efficiency. So imagine the cost of your employees and being able to get more from each of your employees because they now have higher skills. Enhanced innovation and problem-solving capabilities of them, and then higher retention rates because people are more engaged and are just more satisfied with the jobs that they do if they're more highly skilled. The other more bigger picture in terms of benefit from investing in education and then measuring that is societal gains. So economic growth, because we have more skilled workforce, reduced unemployment, and then also social mobility, reducing the inequalities in the society because we have more accessible education. Right? So this is another benefit. In terms of measurable outcomes, it's things like how many certifications or qualifications were obtained, what was the performance improvement, which is really important, or the change in our KPIs in the organization after we've done a training engagement with those individuals. And of course, cost savings or revenue increases linked to educational programs. If we step back a second and let's say we look at this at a sales point of view. So I'm now taking the supply chain hat off and saying I'm now a sales guy. If I train my sales team to have more skills, let's say in month 1, I give them a couple of months to implement what they've learned. Maybe they have new negotiation skills. Maybe they're able to close deals more quickly. Maybe they're able to find more of the right customers. With those skills, we should then be able to see an increase in revenue because we've now trained them on a certain thing. The same applies within our supply chain. We should now, if we're training individuals on how to do inventory management or how to do demand planning, we should see a correlated improvement later on our inventory days of supply or cost of holding inventory, and also our forecast accuracy. Right? These could be metrics that we might see out of that, which are completely measurable. Right? So ROI or ROE provides a holistic framework so that we can really evaluate the value of education and training beyond just that high-level financial metric and really look at those other more direct applicable metrics. We want to emphasize how transformative it can be, specifically for individuals, organizations, and of course, communities as well. So I'd like to dive in before we get into the V model. It's just a discussion around how to determine your training needs. So I think you'd mostly agree with me when I say we need to do a capability assessment. What are the skills that we are lacking in our organization, right? In a specific area of the supply chain. So this could be through analysis and testing of capability versus our best practices, body of knowledge of ASCM is very helpful there. And also you could do an assessment, right? There's many types of assessments that you could do within your company. You could do an assessment that looks at a more skill-specific assessment, so understanding the really detailed workings of the individual. So can they calculate a forecast accuracy, or do they know how to do a certain finding? Specific skills within the individual that you can test. But also you can do this at a higher level, which is individuals, their thoughts around how capable or how confident they feel in doing their jobs available to do the jobs that they need to do. So there are ways in which you can do a capability assessment. The next step is to then say, okay, so with those capabilities that we need, what are the right skills that individuals should have to do those things, right? So we need more skill in demand planning in that area of our business, let's say. The skill we need is forecasting. The skill we need is being able to do Excel modeling, being able to do scenario planning. These kind of things are important within that area. And then the third step comes to sustained education. So, of course, we'll be looking at this today from a ASCM perspective. There are other areas that of course, you can look at, but there's different types of education. So what education types relates to the kind of skill that we want to add to our organization. Then there's a step after that, which now we start to get into return on education. And how do you apply what you've learned internally driven within the company itself through initiatives, projects and things like that, or assisted through a consulting organization, and also through programs or projects within the organization itself. So that's the application component of that specific area. But there's one piece that I didn't mention, and that's really even before we get to capability assessment. And what we need to think about here is our supply chain performance and our supply chain maturity. I'm going to take the people side away from this, right? Let's not think about how great it is for people and individuals to be upskilled, right? It's great. It feels nice. We like to be a well-educated workforce. But there's actually a business case for this, right? And the business case relates back to, are we achieving the performance that we want to achieve on those metrics, on those KPIs? Or is our supply chain at the maturity level that it needs to be? And where we see gaps is going to dictate what kind of skills we want to implement and what kind of training we should be doing, right? This is where we need to start looking. It's from that perspective, less than a starting point of the individual. Okay, so that's really important just to remember. Then I want to jump into what we call the V model. And it's called the V model because it's shaped like a V, as you can see. So what you see here is really two sides of this diagram. On the left-hand side, you have the pre-training analysis. So this is the step that happens before any training, before engaging with Symbios-Consulting, or as at the time of engaging with Symbios, for example, to determine the value that we expect to get out of the program. A very important component of return on engagement, return on education, is we need to make a comparison between what we expected we would get versus what we actually got. It's a little bit too late once we've done the training. We've spent $100,000, and now we go and try and investigate what we got out of it. We should have a plan up front, right? What are the objectives that we want to achieve up front? So we'll talk through this side of the diagram in a second. And then on this side of the diagram, on the right-hand side, we have the measurement and evaluation. So that is everything we do once we've run a training engagement. So people have gone, they've trained on their CSCP, and now we want to measure the impact of that. So if you'd like more information on this, by the way, there's a great website here, riinstitute.net. This is what we've adapted this from. So a really great model to use and think about. All right, so what is the first thing we have to do? So right at the beginning, before we even get to what kind of training we're going to do, we need to determine the payoff needs. So let's think about what kind of maybe we're in a competitive industry as an organization, as a supply chain. Maybe we have a constraint on our budgets for training and for consulting. So there might be a need for us to evaluate this for that reason, right? We need to tell the CEO, the board, whoever is the person in charge, what this is going to cost us and why we need to do it. So those payoff needs right in the beginning, right? And that typically relates to a financial view of that, right? We think we're going to spend $100,000 and we think we can get $400,000 worth of value out of that. The next step is to look at the business needs. Now, this is where I usually focus the most, because specifically around the training engagement, usually training is really for a specific topic, right? We have a certain topic, a certain focus area, and we want to be able to measure the effectiveness of that. It's very seldom that you're going to get a training engagement in an organization that covers everything, right? It's not going to look at finances, procurement, supply chain, sales, marketing, everything at once, IT, right? It's very seldom going to be that. It's going to be focused on one of those areas. So within the specific business needs, what we need to do here is to really talk about specific metrics, right? Not revenue, not at that level. How much and do we think this is going to impact on inventory days of supply? Is it going to impact on our OTIF number? Is it going to impact on our customer service from another metric perspective? Is it going to help us make our business more agile? These are the elements we need to put in here before we've started the training engagement. Okay, so what do we think the benefit is going to be? The third step, or the step down here, is the performance needs. So how are we going to ensure that once those students that come out of the training engagement have finished it, how are we going to make sure that they implement it? Okay, so the easiest way in my mind to ensure that is run the training program, and then after the training program, create an initiative that's going to use those new skills that were created, right? So this is how you enforce that, how you govern it, and how you make sure that we see the outcome of the training engagement. But very often this happens where organizations, and this happens with big and small companies, they send their students, their employees, to a training engagement of some kind, and then the training is done. They maybe get a certification of some kind, and that's it. Nothing else happens after that, right? But they've just spent a lot of money on those individuals. So this is where it becomes important, right? To make sure that we're guiding the employees who have had this new skill to actually implement their new abilities. So this is what we want to do under performance needs, is what's required there, okay? What we have down here is what are the learning needs? So what do we want students to get out of the training engagement when they go on to that, right? The awareness for them, their ability to be involved in it, how engaged are they in it? That's what we want to achieve over there, right? At that step there. And then the preference need, which is really how we will engage the actual training engagement. What we will actually do. Is it going to be in person? Is it going to be live online? Or is there going to be another way we run it? Will we add some sort of more on-the-job kind of training? Will it be more practical? Will it be more theoretical? Will there be an exam or a test at the end? Will they have to do a little project? Those are the kind of questions that we're going to answer there under preference needs. So you can see as we go down into more detail, we're really going down to the level of detail saying, okay, what do we have to do in the training engagement to make sure that it ultimately achieves these other objectives? So we have the reaction objectives, learning objectives, application objectives, impact objectives, and our ROI objectives as well. So this is all before we even started the engagement. Okay. Now we want to do a training. Imagine you're going on a training with Shireen Osama. Very good trainer, by the way. But this is where we do that piece. Okay. The first thing is the reaction. So you're going through the training, you're understanding the content, there's some new information there. How can we measure that? We can measure that through a feedback questionnaire, right? Some sort of feedback that's coming through, or maybe even a step inside the training itself. So this is what a lot of our large organizations that work with ASCM do, is a certain level of the way through the training engagement. What they will usually do is get a bit of a dipstick test, right? And say, okay, how are you feeling about the training? Is it meeting your objectives? Is there anything we should be doing differently? Should we be changing something slightly to make it more applicable? I'll give you a perfect example of this. We're working with right now a big pharmaceutical company. We're doing a mass training with them. It's some certifications for the 4 different certifications that we offer. And one group in the class tried to really push a different timeline and time agenda, and with the right intentions, of course, right? So they said, look, why don't we do, instead of 3-hour sessions twice a week, we'd maybe prefer to continue with this at 2-hour sessions. It's more convenient for us, and those kind of things, right? So that came from an initial feedback in terms of how their training was going and how they wanted to adjust it to suit their needs a bit better. The second one is learning. So here it's a simple question, right? What did you learn coming out of the training engagement? So if you imagine the objectives of each training engagement that typically you have, did we learn these different skills in that engagement, right? So this is what we want to measure over here. This is feedback from those individuals saying, yes, I'm aware, I learned how to do demand planning, I learned how to do scenario planning through that, and then also rate the importance of the objectives that they learned to the business success. So which of those skills that they learned that they did not know before are most important to really align to the business objectives, right? To make the business better. So this is what we get under that learning step over there. I hope you're still with me on this, right? The next step we're going to go to is application. So now that we've learned all of this, and remember under performance needs, we said, how are we going to create an initiative or project, for example, that's going to force people to use the skills that they now have? So here we're going to evaluate how people used it, right? So this step here, number 3, it doesn't say the impact of it, right? We're not talking about what the outcome was. We're talking about to what degree did we implement a new skill that we have. This is where that applies. The next step that I'll go up is to impact. So here we get to the importance. So now we know under application, we might have applied it in a certain way. Let's say within our planning function, we added forecasting and scenario planning. What impact did that have? Did we see an improvement on our forecast accuracy a few months down the line after we had applied our new skills? This is where the real outcome comes in, right? This is the important part, because now we're going to see what actually happened as a result of that training engagement. Okay, so impact, and then of course the latest one, the most pinnacle of return on investment is the ROI, return on investment, or the ROE in our case, or the BCR, the benefit cost ratio. These are really the two that we'll get to at the very top, but it's tricky sometimes to go from here to here, right? Because you might know a metric, but you might not know the exact impact on the return on investment from a revenue perspective or from a cost point of view. But it's okay to stop there, right? It's okay to say, here was the impact of the investment that we made on this training engagement, even if we don't get to that step over there. right? But this is really the ultimate. So what I want to share with you then is just thinking about that ROI metric and the benefit cost ratio. So when we look at costs, we have direct cost of the product. So direct cost of the training materials, of the exam, those kinds of things, even corporate membership, whatever was added to that, which was direct there. We also have the direct cost for time and effort, right? Renting a venue, for example, this time we spend out of the office and on training, travel expenses, and those kinds of things. Those are also costs that are related to the training engagement, right? And what you have here, it's just in a dotted line because this isn't part of the calculation, but looking at this from a similar perspective to what other types of training we could do and what that would mean as a comparative, right? So that's just a way to isolate the benefits compared to other things that we might do. But the important part here is the direct cost for the product and the direct cost for time and effort. That would be our total cost. Then the next is the benefit. So we have direct tangible benefits, for example, cost savings due to improved efficiency. Or we have indirect tangible benefits like savings and other things that we might do. In our case, savings on memberships would be one, but you might see individual components in your supply chain that had some sort of indirect benefit as well, even if it's engagement of employees, right? Those kind of things that we can quantify. And then we have the direct intangible benefits, which I said the employee engagement levels. And of course, this isn't really in the calculation, but definitely things that we can list out as well as benefits. Okay. And then really quickly, just to share with you, they're really simple calculations, but in order to get a benefit cost ratio, we're just going to look at the total benefits in money terms versus the total cost, okay, over the total cost. This is going to be a ratio like 1:3, 1:7, something like that. And then for an ROE perspective, we're going to look at the benefits less cost, so the total net benefit over the total cost. And hopefully the top line here will be more than the bottom line over here, right? So you'll have a benefit that's greater than zero, right? You should get to that if it's successful. Sometimes it isn't, right? Sometimes it's a negative ROE, but we want to do this calculation to measure it like that, okay? Then I'm just going to really not go into too much detail with this, but really what I want to just clarify, because this was part of what we looked at the B model, is we have the pre-engagement, we then have a during engagement, and we have a post-engagement step. So this might be something that's useful to you to look at, but really we have the goals pre-engagement, which is establish what the expected benefit will be out of that training engagement, and also try to isolate the outcomes. So when I say isolate, I mean, maybe we're only training one part of the business, right? Only one geographic region, for example. Let's isolate that, say, let's measure the benefits from that geographic region, also compared to all the other geographic regions, right? Did we see more benefit in that specific region because they got a training engagement versus the others that didn't? So this is what we want to do. But before the actual engagement itself is to note that. Then during the engagement, it's about observing the initial reactions and the actual change that we saw, and post it, measure the impact that it had. So taking you through the steps here, we would want to look at doing a baseline. So establish the baseline. Where are we right now with that metric or with the revenue, with the cost? Let's do a comparative analysis, right? Comparing what we could do as other options to this specific engagement that we've chosen. What cost will we incur? And what benefits do we think we're going to get in the benefit statement perspective? Our timeline of how and when we will expect to receive those benefits, which depends on the implementation or the application of the students of the new skills that they've learned. And then put together some kind of a program chart of how it will engage with this. During the engagement, this is while the training is going on. What are the reactions of the students and what are the learnings that they're getting from that? And then the application, right? Applying it. We mentioned this a lot. Making sure we actually do the stuff that we learned. Looking at the metrics impact and then doing those two calculations that I just mentioned, the benefits cost ratio and then the return on the investment. Okay, so this is just a way that we can apply this type of methodology. And then finally, I'd like to leave you with two slides to the end here. Let's just talk a little bit about who ASCM is. So we work very closely with Symbios-Consulting. They are a key partner of ours based in the Middle East. I was speaking to Shireen earlier before the session started, and she's finally moved to Saudi because that's where it's all happening. But not permanently, but I know that she's based there quite a lot. But yes, we work with Symbios-Consulting quite a lot in the Middle East and many regions. So ASCM is the global leader in supply chain organizational development, transformation, and innovation and leadership. We are a non-profit entity, which means that we don't have a specific agenda. What we try to do is be unbiased. So we try to create training and learning opportunities for the supply chain community that is focused on what you need now and what you might need in the future. Right? So we do what's called job task analysis, looking at what skills are really important and what skills are potentially lacking from a training perspective and how we can implement those into organizations. We have 60 years, which is actually now more than 60 years of experience with our best-in-class credentials. And we use various models and frameworks as the basis of the body of knowledge to help individuals and organizations get better, learn more, have better skills, and have better information to achieve their goals and objectives. So what I know we mentioned briefly, the maturity levels and talent levels in an organization. So we'd like to offer you two free assessments. We will be working with Symbios-Consulting to execute these for you. The one is a maturity assessment, looking at different elements in your supply chain. And if you go to this QR code over here, you can actually put your information and details in, and we will be happy to contact you to start that free assessment. And then we do also have a talent assessment. So because we're talking a lot about training and education today, we have a free talent assessment, which you can send to all of your employees or certain parts of the supply chain. And with that, we'll give you a report and some insights in terms of what your next steps could be to try and close any gaps that you might have in your skills. So hopefully that will help, and hopefully that's of interest to you. And then finally, just to give you a sense of some of the training options that we provide them over various levels of organizations, so right down from the workforce all the way up to executive level. And you can see here we have multiple options for individuals to take advantage of, and within different areas of the supply chain. So our level 1 supply chain processes from the score model over here. And within each of these different areas, if we have a need within sourcing, for example, to do more training at a specific level, we might have an option for you in terms of what you could go and do. And then don't forget, before you go through this engagement, to have a look at what the return is that you're looking for. How are you going to measure it? How are you going to apply it? And what it could potentially assist you with in your journey to ultimate supply chain excellence. So with that, I'd like to say thank you so much for your time today. Please let me know if there are any questions. I don't know if I can see all the questions, if there are any, but thank you so much. Back over to you, Shireen.
Thank you very much, Grant. Some people say to you, congratulations on your certificate. So you have great followers.
Thank you. Thank you. So it took me a few months to get it.
Was it tough?
It's not that tough, but so we have to do a project. So it's a little bit time consuming to do the project, but it's doable. It's doable. There's a lot to read, but it is doable.
Okay. So so far I don't see any questions, but I heard you mentioning that the talent is becoming for free. Talent assessment is becoming for free.
That's correct.
So how can companies do it or access it?
Yeah, it's a great
Do
point.
they have to contact us? Yeah.
Yes. So we actually this is actually it's a secret. Let me call it that, because we don't offer this on our website. So everybody on the call today, if you send an email to, you'll see Zainab, your email address is on that, it's a QR code. If you send an email to Zainab, she'd be able to get in contact with us at ASCN, and then we will call you for an initial discussion, probably about 30 minutes or so. We will just talk about your needs, what you're looking at doing, and then send you the links to do the assessment itself. After that, we need about less than a week, I'd say, to provide you with output of what the talent assessment has provided you with. And then we can give you some recommendations around what we think would work well in your organization. What's really nice about this assessment is that it does automatically actually give the organization of what learning opportunities are available for certain gaps in your supply chain. So it's the supply chain view, right? Planning, sourcing, procurement, etc. This is how it sees skills. So it's not at an individual level, but we aggregate all the individual responses up to get to an overall picture of where we are on our skills and competency levels. So they can just go into the QR code here and then send an email to Zainab.
So I think that's really amazing. That's really amazing. Okay, to have it and have this maturity assessment and supply chain maturity. So I think so. Now, can you just in 5 minutes can you speak to people about the certificate, which is not known by the most of people, CTSC, Certified in Supply Chain Transformation?
Yes, sure, absolutely. So the CTSC, the Certified in Transformation for Supply Chain Certification, and I'll just position it over here. It's this one here. This is so I want to position it in a way, and this might sound like it's a simple way of defining it, but become a supply chain consultant in 6 days is how I would describe it, right? What the CTSC does is it already assumes that you know supply chain management, right? It's not going into concepts like what is planning, what is forecasting, what is transformation, how do we do manufacturing, MPS and MRP, how do we do that stuff? It makes the assumption that we already know that, right? It's got a much more, I'd say a little bit more of a mature view of the supply chain. So what the CTSC does is help you learn the skills to identify, quantify, and solve for gaps in your supply chain. So it's extremely powerful because the skill that you have there is saying, okay, we've identified that there are certain processes or there's a metric in our supply chain that is not going well. Let's get to the root cause of what the problem is, right? And understand what is going on and how we can solve that problem. So this is a much more strategic certification. It really is a certification that's more forward thinking, right? It's a skill set versus a knowledge set, if I can put it like that. The other certifications we have are really good, right? But if you were to look at the CSCP, it's the knowledge around supply chain. If you look at CTSC, it's how do I do it? How do I implement it? And it gives you that skill, right? It's a way of thinking. So for me, it's a really powerful certification. Anyone in continuous improvement, anyone at a level that's higher than sort of even a management level and above, I would highly recommend looking at the CTSC as an option if you're considering doing a further certification. It's tough. It's not impossible, but it has really got a way of making you think, right, about what you're doing in your supply chain. So that's a great certification. I did it myself. I think it was back in March. It's really great. Does that make sense, Shireen? Back to you, Shireen.
Thank you for the nice explanation. Thank you. But as well, I would add that CTSC helps as well for internal company transformation and people, even ideas, because it includes technology, it includes a lot. Every supply chain leader needs it. Okay. So I would like to thank you. I think we took all our time. Okay. Someone is asking you a question. I'm studying CSCP and planning to do the exam in April. can you please tell me what is the most structured way to study and get ready for the exam for you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I did my CSCP as well, and it does require studying for sure. If you've got that part right, at least. So yeah, actually, if you were to look at your online learning system, you would have access there to there's a test there's an exam. It's like a fake exam that you can do on the learning system portal. And then with that, you'll be able to see where your gaps are. What I would recommend is plan your study sequence according to what you have the worst marks on, right? So where you did the worst, study that first and leave the other more familiar content to a little bit later on. What's important in all our certifications really is it's not really only about memorizing the content, it's about understanding it. So if I was you, I'll go through each page, make sure you understand what it means, and then you can tick it off and say you get it, right? Because the questions that you will see in the test, the test exam, are very specific questions, right? And sometimes you have answers that are a little bit right, but not 100% correct, right? So it can be a bit tricky from that sense, but I would make sure you focus on what you know worst first, and then also focus on understanding versus learning, right? Versus memorizing. I hope that helps.
Yes, and I would like to announce that we give very special discount to people who register through exams through us, and you can contact Zainab to get as well the material. Very important for you to get the material to the trial exam. It's very important. You need to do the trial exam. Because trial exams are so helpful and they only exist at the ASEM website. So please contact Zainab and we give discount more than 15%. Okay?
Amazing.
We can ask
Amazing.
exam for more. Well, okay. Okay. So I think we are done. We are done. We're finished. Okay. Thank you, Grant.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Shireen, and thank you to the Symbios-Consulting team for all the efforts that you put in. We really appreciate it and hope to hear from you all soon. And please let us know if there's any questions as well. More than happy to engage with you on any topics anytime. Thank you, everyone. Have a great evening further.
Thank you, everyone. Shukran.